He's one of the most iconic and legendary voices in the entire River Valley, and today he's in my studio on the hot seat. The legendary Tom Kamerling is next on the Spotlight. From the studios of Alathus Realty in beautiful downtown Russellville, we welcome you into the Spotlight on this Tuesday. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Drew Brent, and if you're in the market to buy or sell your home, give us a call today, 479-968-5668, or cruise on over to russellvilleliving.com. One of our fine agents is always ready, willing, and able to help you. That's russellvilleliving.com. Well, if you've been in Russellville for any length of time and listened to any radio station, then you have heard this man's voice, particularly on Taco Tuesday for Taco John's. This man's name is Tom Kamerling. Mr. Kamerling, what an honor it is for me to have you here. Thank you, sir.
Oh, it's great to be here with you. It really is.
There is so much that I could ask you about. There's so much that I could get into. I am a radio nerd. I'm fascinated by it. We had Johnny's story on a couple of weeks ago. We talked about that. Johnny's a good friend of mine, and I am just fascinated by how many great broadcasters really came through this area. You've been here a long time.
Yeah.
How did you get your start?
It goes back to high school. I went to Fort Smith Northside High School. I'm originally from Wisconsin. That's where I was born and raised. My dad was from Wisconsin, and my mom was from Van Buren, Arkansas. They met at a USO show at Fort Chaffee during World War II, and that's where that all began. So anyway, I went to high school at Fort Smith Northside, and I was all set. I love history of all kinds. And so I had already decided to go to Hendrix College in Conway and study history and maybe be a history teacher. But fateful days that occurred long about my junior year and also in my senior year, our band at Northside High School had a number of really good musicians that particular time, and Gene Witherspoon from Arkansas Tech, along with Bob Bright, came up, and you might call it a recruiting visit, but it was a visit that they made and said, hey, you guys need to come to Arkansas Tech and study music, and we have a great band, and which we already knew. And so I went to my first exposure was to come for the first Arkansas Tech band camp. That was the summer of '64, and I came back in 1965, and then I came here as a student, a music major. So being that way, I needed some way of working my way through college. My mom and dad didn't have enough money to pay my way through.
Sure.
So I was interested in the field of all kinds of radio, basically because when I was growing up, my favorite ball team was the Milwaukee Braves baseball team. And so, believe it or not, it sounds a little silly probably, but as a youngster, ages 9, 10, 11, I would play imaginary games with the baseball cards on the floor, that kind of thing. And so I really enjoyed that. So in my second year of college, I ran into a guy who was working at the KMAG radio station in Fort Smith. He invited me up to look it over, and which I did, was fascinated. At that time, they were called the Magazine of the Air. They played like classics, and they played show tunes and stuff like that. So anyway, he hollers at me one day and says that the radio station in Van Buren is looking for an announcer, and I thought you might be interested. So I went over, met the guy. His name was George Domeries.
Very
And
good, very famous name around here too.
oh
In
yes,
radio.
his son, excuse me, his son Tim, of course, ran a radio station right here for a number of years.
Yes.
And so I met George, and I went in there to talk to him, and he said, "How you doing?" "Fine." He said, "Sit down here and read this piece of copy," which that's the first time I'd ever heard the word copy.
Yeah.
And he said, "Sit down and read this copy," in which I did. And he said, "I'll be in the other room. Just let me know." So I had no idea what. That's the first time I'd ever stepped into a radio studio. So that's where it all began. I started KFDF in Van Buren, Arkansas, 1580 on the dial, and then when I came to tech, I found that field to be the one that I wanted to follow. So I got involved with the old KXRJ frequency before it was Carve Radio, and then a little later KCAB, and the rest of it is history.
The rest is history, so they say. But that's skipping a whole lot of history because you were here for some of the most influential moments of this area. We'll talk about that here in just a few moments. I was always fascinated by the people who influenced the people that I was influenced by. You know, when Johnny was here a few weeks ago, I told him about when I was younger. You know, the people that I listened to growing up were Johnny, were you, John Masters. I always liked John Masters, even though he took off somewhere, and Jarrett and Bob Robbins, Tommy Smith. Those guys were the ones that I grew up idolizing and thinking, man, these are the people that I just found radio fascinating. I just found it fascinating. Who are the people that you listened to that you found fascinating, that you wanted to emulate or be like?
Well, a couple of people. First of all, as living in Wisconsin, I listened at night a lot to WLS in Chicago, which was probably the premier rock station of the late 60s, or even the mid 60s. A guy by the name of Dick Biondi was the king of the DJs. That was back when DJs were kind of famous, you know. And so I listened to him every night. And they had a top 10 show every night of the top 10, rock hits that were out at the time, and I would listen to them. I also listened to a couple of guys who were doing Milwaukee Braves baseball at that time, Earl Gillespie and Blaine Walsh, and they were great to listen to, and they were kind of funny. And of course, I was listening to Braves games, so that was some of the people that that I tried to emulate.
You were also honored recently as 50 years, the announcer at Arkansas Tech University. Doesn't seem like 50 years, or does it? Does it seem like 50 years? Or
No, it really doesn't, because that starts me in it's 1971, and I got the opportunity to do the semi place game between Arkansas Tech football, and Aberdeen, South Dakota. Now, this was the game before they went to Birmingham, Alabama, and played in the national championship game. As luck would have it, I worked for Mike Horn, whose birthday was just a few days ago, as a matter of fact, who used to own KARV radio. And being he was the boss, he decided that he was going to do the championship game. I got
Sure.
to do the semi, but so no, it really doesn't. Really, it's kind of like yesterday. I can remember the things that I was doing about that time. So, but it's been a great 50 years, and they surprised me, and I was floored. I told Abby Davis, the athletic director, when we were on the field, I said, I believe this is one of the few times I've been caught speechless.
I want to tell you, I told you before we went on the air that I had a story relating to this that I wanted to tell you. There was a basketball game when I was in college that you could not make for some reason. And you called me and you asked me to fill in for you as public address at Tucker Coliseum. I was over the moon excited. I could not believe, first off, and this may sound silly to you, first off, I couldn't believe that Tom Kamerling was calling me. And then secondly, I couldn't believe that I got the opportunity, because anytime that I don't know if you still feel this way or not. I'm sure you do. Anytime you get behind that microphone, it's an honor. It's a privilege. And I felt just over the moon to get to be the PA announcer one game at Tucker Coliseum. This particular game, however, was a double whammy against me. One, we were playing the University of Arkansas Monticello, where Mike Newell was the head coach.
Oh boy.
It also happened to be the same night that the commissioner of the Gulf South Conference was coming in, Nate Salant. And I had to, as the public address announcer for the evening, say Nate Salant's name several times, as the conference asked me to do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as you know, Mike Newell is never short on words around anyone. And every time I said the commissioner's name, Mike Newell gave me the business so hard on that sideline.
I can imagine.
Behind that press table, he's like, I guess you guys are related. You just love the guy, don't you? I was like, I was a 20-year-old kid trying to do the best that I could with Mike Newell giving me the business. What are some stories that you have about being behind the press row or up in the press box?
Well, you bring up Nate's name. I was doing a Tech football game in the old press box, and so this was one of the years that Tech had a really good football team, and the running back got into the open and was going to score a touchdown, and I got excited, and I said, and he's running to the 30, the 20, and this was on PA. Nate comes running down in that. There was no dividers. It was the whole press box was open. He comes running down there and he says, "You can't do that." I said, What do you mean I can't do it? You can't say anything about that guy running the football until he's either scored or the whistle's been blown." I thought, I had never heard that before.
Right.
And that just kind of set me back. Was that was I didn't understand it from that. I've always remembered that from then on, not to get too excited on an open field play. So that's probably one of the stories that I best remember. Of course, the old press box did not have any restroom facilities. And so if you were in a situation where you wanted to partake of the restroom, you had to go all the way downstairs underneath the press box, underneath the grandstand, to go to the restroom. So that became a challenge. Every home football game was for that situation.
Jim Ross is an announcer for Oklahoma Sooners.
Yes.
Famous professional wrestling announcer for years and years and years. I heard an interview he did one time where he was talking about that very thing, about the facilities problem within Oklahoma and within a ringside event or whatever else. And this is what he said, Tom. "That's why I wear dark pants." Can you believe that? And
yes, I certainly can believe that.
I 100% believe that it happened, but I just couldn't believe somebody actually said it out loud. Beyond your experience as the public address announcer, you have been a part of some incredible moments here in the River Valley. You were on the air. How long were you on the air on radio here?
39 years.
39 years. And that was across KARV, KCJC, where all were you?
KCAB, that KWKK. Of course, KCAB and KWKK were in Dardanelle until the big conglomerate move that put them all in one place now. But so we had the AM KCAB, and then the FM went on the air, I believe, about 1975, and then of course the others. KXRJ was the precursor to. They wanted to go to this Arkansas River Valley logo, so Mr. Horn and that group, they got the KARV you know, symbols, call letters, which are still in use.
Um, you mentioned Mike Horn. EAB owns KARV
Hmm.
now. Mike Horn owned it for a long time. Then there was a guy in the middle who is legendary in Northwest Arkansas, and every radio personality that I have met in this area has worked for him at least once or twice. What memories do you have of the Colonel, Kermit Womack?
Colonel Womack, yes. Let me tell you, he's a fellow that is very uh, disciplined. His Army background, that's why they call him the Colonel. He is really a full bird colonel in the Arkansas National Guard. And that's pretty well the way he ran the radio business. Um, he came to KARV, took over, did a tremendous job, and but he is difficult to work for. Uh, not that is not a slap at Mr. Womack because he expects the best and he will get the best. Um, but some people psychologically and etc. just couldn't fit in with him, and that. But I learned more from him and the way that he ran the radio station than any other single person that I was around, because he was the person who introduced me to really doing play by play and doing it often and stretching out to all the teams in the Arkansas River Valley, things that he invented and brought to this radio market. Dream teams,
Mm-hmm.
industrial recognition days, agricultural appreciation days, senior salutes when you salute the seniors in high school. All these different things uh, were things that he introduced. Dial-a-trade, uh, you
Yeah.
know, all of those things he introduced to this area. Bids for bargains, all those things are things that he started and are known across the country now.
Um, One thing that you didn't mention that I do want to touch on, and this might be for more of our old school viewer. Um, one of the things that Kermit Womack also introduced was the KARV weather radar.
That's for sure.
And that was, I mean, and I can't really put into context for our younger viewers how big of a deal that was when it came in. It was a huge deal to have an accessible weather radar that was in the old studio. I mean, it sat right there in the lobby. I mean, it was still accessible for years and years. I think I actually was the last person on the old KARV to give a weather report. I'm not sure on that, but I think I might have been the last one. Uh, Talk about that. I mean, you talked about the revolutionary things that he brought. I mean, there's you mentioned dial-a-trade. That's iconic here.
Hmm.
But talk about one other thing you didn't mention: party line.
Oh boy. Party line began actually as a means to get people involved with the radio station live on the air. It wasn't so much at that time a situation of discussing um, political terms and political situations that were going on in the state or in the area. I could remember Mr. Bill McKinney, who was the engineer. He was the technical man for us at KARV, and that was his one on air that he did a day, was the 1 hour he did of Party Line. Well, the Party Line program, a lot of people called in giving recipes, how to do things. If you need to take a stain out of a piece of clothing or something like that, that's where that began. I can remember him many, many times. He'd say, lady'd call in, "Would you please repeat that Mississippi mud cake recipe?" And he would go through it, and you had 1 cup of flour You had one cup of sugar, you know. So that's really where Party Line began, and then it finally melded in. We for a time there, during the 8 o'clock hour, before we went to Dollar Trade 3 times a day, 8, 1, and 5. We ran a program called The Big Question, and the big question was what Party Line or Spotlight or whichever you want to call the program. That's where that came from. That was the topic of the day, whether it was the wet dry issue for Pope County or whatever it happened to
Right.
be. That was the time we ran those kind of controversial deals, and then it melded with the Party Line.
You've done sports. You've done, as you were just talking about, you've done talk radio. Um, you were KCJC Mornings for years. Um, what was the assignment, the gig that you enjoyed the most?
I really enjoyed doing play-by-play most, although there's lots of things that we did at the radio stations through the years that stick out to me, from doing the live Yell County Fair Parade. On those cold nights, we did the Russellville Christmas Parade, you know, which is one of the state's biggest. Uh, those were a lot of fun, um, but football and basketball games particularly I enjoyed doing. One time I was sent out. Arkansas Tech played a non-conference game at Langston University in Oklahoma, and I went out there and I found a place to park, and I walked in and noticed there was a lot of fencing around, and I had quite a distance to walk to get to the press box. Got up there, got set up, and the guy who was the sports information director said to me, "Where did you park?" And I said, "Well, down between those buildings on the other side of the basketball." He said, "Might be a good idea if you come and park your car inside this fenced area." He says, we've had a problem here over the last few years. If we don't win, then cars that are not from this area sometimes get damaged. So, so so that was one that I remembered was going to Langston University. Uh, there's trips I've taken all over the state, which have been great. I went to Abilene Christian in Texas once upon a time, and believe it or not, that's the first place I ever saw garage sales. I pulled into Abilene Christian, and I'm coming down the road into Abilene, and there's people set up on both sides of the road, and I thought, what in the world are they doing? You know, and come to find out they were doing garage sales before garage sales came to this area. That's my first exposure with that.
We are talking to the legendary Tom Kamerling here on the Spotlight. If you're in the market to buy or sell your home, give us a call today, 479-968-5668, or cruise on over to RussellvilleLiving.com. If you're not familiar, Tom Kamerling has been the public address announcer for Arkansas Tech University for half a century, celebrating 50 years this year. He's been on the airwaves since the 70s, and that's something else I wanted to mention here. I remember as a kid listening to KCJC, and you and Johnny and later Jarrett Jackson were the guys that I grew up listening to. It was always on the way to school. It was either you guys or Bob Robbins that I ended up. And if Dad took us, it was Tommy Smith, but never when Mom was taking us. But before that, at KARV, you were part of covering one of the biggest events that has happened in this area probably ever. Take me back to December 1987.
Johnny and I are sitting in the newsroom at KARV, just like we did most mornings. After we got through the major newscasts of the morning, we would gather in the newsroom and kind of look to see what was available, what we were going to cover, and I should put in context. In those days, now you have a very minimal staff in radio because automation and voice tracking and things like that have reduced the number of people that are necessary to run a radio station. In those days, we had between 25 and 30 in one radio station.
Wow.
KARV we had 2 engineers, we had 4 people in news, we had a night news person, all that stuff. Anyway, to get back to that day, Johnny and I are sitting in the newsroom and we're listening, have the scanner turned up to listen for police calls, etc. And we heard about they reported a shooting at Peel Law Firm, which was only about maybe 4 or 5 blocks away from the radio station. So Johnny and I had jumped in the red van and we ran up there, keeping in contact with the radio station. By the time we got to the Peel Law Firm, we get another call that there was a further shooting out at the nursery. People who did own the nursery later, and they also owned, I think, a gas company, also Rusty Taylor, that bunch. And so we left there and went out to the next one. And by the time we got to there, we were given indication that this shooter had gone to the eastern part of Russellville and had invaded another area and had opened fire. So we were running out there. So we didn't really know what was happening at that point. We later, of course, found out this was Gene Simmons, that he was on a shooting spree, a killing spree, and which began with those that actually happened in Russellville. Gene Simmons had been a clerk at a convenience store that was at that time on East Main. And so I had run into him several times going into that convenience store. But we, of course, didn't know what the extent was of that shooting till we got all of that put together. And he, of course, was finally arrested. So after that, of course, we got back, and this became the story across the country.
Yeah.
This was the #1 news story for television, radio, etc. And from that point on, for the next 3 to 4 days, solid, we didn't leave the radio station. We were constantly on the phone providing feed information or information, voice, news story things to different television networks. We spoke to Germany, Australia, Great Britain, all the major. We were a CBS affiliate at that time, so we were doing a story an hour on the Gene Simmons case for CBS. So all that was happening. You've seen the deal where the guy is holding telephone receivers with both hands. Well, that actually did happen because we were on. I remember they called and said, "Would you be on a morning show in San Francisco?" So I was already on one line, so we went to another line. So that's how that all transpired. And really, you didn't have time to really get concerned about the story itself, and because you're so busy putting things together. And then Johnny, of course, went out to the Gene Simmons home,
Yeah.
out on Broomfield Road, and he was there, of course, at that most traumatic time. I was back at the studio taking his calls. That most traumatic time when, of course, they discovered all the family members that had been murdered out there, right after Christmas. So probably the biggest story I ever worked on.
I've never worked on anything to that magnitude, but I have worked on stories that were traumatic, unquestionably. When I was in the Little Rock market, we had them a lot. When you are and I think it's different. Tell me if I'm wrong about this. As a person who was in radio in the late '80s, early '90s, especially in that time, when there was a morphing period, it almost seemed like in the '70s and '80s, radio was still considered semi-journalism, in addition to some entertainment. Whereas in the '80s and '90s, it really morphed with the advent of cable news. Radio kind of shifted more over into the entertainment side. But even then, as you're trying to maintain journalistic integrity and you're trying to get facts and you're trying to do these things right, ultimately, when you cover a story like that, it takes a toll, emotionally, mentally, however. Um, how are you able to balance that?
Well, I can tell you, it took a toll on all of us.
Yeah.
It really did. Something, and most of us that were either working in the story or people that we ran into personally knew all of these people or of these people that were murdered, whether it was family members, kids that went to school with some of those kids, or whether it was people that went into the Peel law firm and knew his secretary, who was the one that was killed there. And so, it has stayed with me the entire time since that time. That's something that it still brings memories, yes, and also it's kind of one of those times in your life that you say, how did I get through that and maintain mentally,
Yeah.
when you're talking about 18 people getting killed, that type of story is one that just doesn't leave you. That's on the bad side. You also have those on the good side that you save and you welcome to bring back into your memories.
And let's switch to that because I remember growing up, and maybe this is just my own thinking, but I don't think that it is. If you talked about Russellville radio, you talked about Johnny and Tom. Tell me about your relationship with Johnny Story.
Johnny, of course, is a lifelong Russellville resident. He and his folks lived out on the north side of Russellville for forever. Johnny was persistent. Johnny wanted to be in radio. You were talking about you wanted to be in radio.
Yeah.
He wanted that experience. That was what he was going to do. And he persisted until it's interesting that we had a program called Sunday in the Carveland, another one of these Kermit Womack inventions. So what we did is every Sunday morning, whoever was assigned went out to a church in the area. We had a full list for every week. And you would record the church service. Then you would bring the tape, the cassette tape in those days, back to the studio, and we played that back at 1 o'clock. So we had all kinds of churches, big churches, little churches, and First Assembly of God Church was the live broadcast at 11 o'clock on the radio station. So we played it back at 1. So finally, we got our heads together and we said, all right, Johnny's here all the time anyway. We're going to put him on to do Sunday in the Carveland. All the rest of it had done it,
Right.
And so he was eager to do that. So he did Sunday in the Carveland, that 1 hour a week for a long time. And then he slowly worked himself into, then he was, he made himself invaluable. And that's what Johnny has been throughout his career, is invaluable. He does so many things well and is so varied in his skills that we got to the point where we need to send him out to set up for a football game. Johnny would do it. And let me tell you, there's times in Little Rock he went with me and set up for ball games when Mr. Womack might send us to a place where it wasn't quite as easy to get a telephone signal into as we would have liked. So he developed that, and he and I became quite close because we worked together in news a lot and on these assignments where he would set up the equipment and all of that. And so we became friends, and so we not only worked together, but we kind of palled around together throughout all those years too. And of course, we worked a morning show at one time, which had originally been what they called Rise and Wise. Alan Reisner, who was here as one of the announcers and salespeople uh, in my early days, and a guy by the name of Jim Wise, who was from Iowa. Uh, they ran a morning show back in the mid '80s, and after they both departed for bigger fish, Johnny and I took it over, and we did things like Name That Tune and all kinds of things, Santa Claus at Christmas and those things. So we not only worked in the same newsroom, etc., but for those hours in the morning, we worked back and forth between the production room, main production room, and the main room of sending out the signal for the radio station.
What was your final year in radio?
2005.
2005 is when you. Well, what are you doing now?
I'm now a trainer for the Arkansas Department of Health. It's called Nuclear Planning and Response. Little bit of a story how that happened. I probably would have never left radio at all because I love it. I love it to this day. People ask me, "Do you miss radio?" I say, "I do every day." I'd still be in the radio business, but I was getting close to the time where I was at least thinking about retirement. And the radio business did not provide any retirement. They didn't have any 401k, none of that. We were happy to have some hospitalization. So I was getting to the point where I'd turned 55 and I was looking, and a fellow by the name of Chris Meyer. Chris and I had worked together at Carve back in the 70s. He's from Morrilton, and he's the manager of this particular Department of Health program. So he called me and asked me if I'd be interested in applying, which I did, and I got that job, and I work for him now. And again, as a trainer, with the nuclear plant here, there's quite a bit that is required all the time to ensure safety of the nuclear plant in relation to the population here. And so my job is to train police departments, fire departments, school, bus drivers, all of those things on what to do should there be an incident at Arkansas Nuclear One. And I've done that the last 16 years.
If you still listen to KCJC, KWKK, KARV, if you flip through the channels, by the way, you should be listening to KARV every Friday morning and listen to the Spotlight presented by Alathus Realty with yours truly as the host. Just a cheap little plug there. Every once in a while, I'll still hear a Taco John's commercial, and I'll still hear Taco Tuesday from Tom Kamerling. Have you heard the ad recently?
I haven't recently, no. I guess I haven't caught it. I do listen, when can't listen at work, but
right.
But I do still listen when I can get an occasion to, and love that commercial. Some kind of just stick with you, and that one, and of course the Taco John's people. That was one when they first came here in the 80s. They wanted something that was a little catchy, and I don't know who actually wrote that particular ad, but it stuck with them. Mr. Menahan, who was the owner at that time, his son runs the Taco John's that is out on East Main now, and so they liked that Taco Tuesday advertising. And the other one was a fellow up on Crow Mountain by the name of Dale Shin. Had a peach orchard, big peach orchard, which is not there any longer. And he wanted something also. So that's when we came and put together the Peaches, Peaches, Peaches commercial, which lasted, lasted for a number of years. He liked that, and I'd go up there and visit with him. And
every once in a while, if you're listening or you're driving down the road, you have an idea for a bit, or you have an idea for a show, and you think, man, that would sell. That would be great. You ever come across anything like that?
Oh, you do on occasion. We did for a long time. There was a car company in Danville by the name of Pantier Chevrolet, and So they decided they wanted to have, one of the salesmen came up with an idea. And it became a series of commercials that were built around some comedy bits. There were different ones, so I won't get into each and every one. But, we kind of developed that, and each week or every 2 weeks, we had to come up with something new for Pantera to keep them interested in continuing to advertise, but also for the listeners to have, because they were always going, well, what's Pantera Chevrolet going to have this time? So,
Right. We're closing in on the last few minutes here of the show. What has been the most rewarding part of your career?
the people I've worked with, not only just the radio people I've worked with, but I've met so many people in doing the radio job, whether going to city council meetings, going to Russellville Chamber of Commerce annual banquets, the sports people that I have met. I mean, I, I met Bill Clinton for the first time when he was running for 3rd District Congressman, and he had a rally at the Old South Restaurant, and I covered that story. People like he is, who later became president of the United States. People like that all along and down the road that not just political people, but just people. Lloyd Reed George is one.
Oh, yeah.
A big influence on me from over in the Danville area. I worked with him for the parades, in Yell County and all that. But the people, whether it was every day or going out on remote broadcasts with people who are business owners here, and you talk about this area, and I'm proud of this area and proud that I'm from this area. I didn't know I was born in Wisconsin. I went to high school in Fort Smith, but this is home and will always be home because of the people that are here and the people that you run across every day and the way they treat you and the way that I feel. I raised my family here. I have a daughter in Fort Smith. I have a son who's band director at Pottsville. My kids are here. Most of my grandkids are here, and that's important to me, that it's an area that I'm proud to call home.
One final question. I'm going to put you on the spot. Are you ready for this?
Okay.
A few years ago, you've talked about all the political people that you've met.
Mm-hmm.
But you were a political person just briefly.
Just briefly.
Will you ever consider political office again?
No, I don't think so. No, I had my one run at it, running for mayor. I would have enjoyed doing that because, again, I'm proud of this city. But I think that's not my niche. I think radio was my niche. Doing the things, even though I'm doing public information now, it's still kind of information processing. And I feel like that's kind of where the good Lord wanted me to be from the time when I put those baseball cards on the floor of my bedroom and hit home runs out by Hank Aaron, out into my bedroom floor. From now, I think that's where the good Lord had as a place for me in this world. He has a plan for all of us, and I think that's just a good part of what his plan has been for me over the last 50 or more years.
And who are we to argue with the good Lord?
No way. Just follow, and he'll never turn you wrong.
Mr. Kamerling, this has been a pleasure. Can we do this again sometime?
Sure. I'm happy to talk with you. Radio and the Arkansas River Valley, I'm happy to talk about all the time.
Outstanding. Tom Kamerling, thanks so much for joining us, and thank you for joining us here on this Tuesday edition of the Spotlight. Mr. Kamerling talked about the Christmas parade. That's coming up on Thursday, and the legendary Johnny Story and myself will have the call on that as we are live streaming on the City of Russellville Facebook page, and then also, of course, right here on the Olathe Realty Facebook page. So join us for the live stream if you can't make it out to the Christmas parade coming up this Thursday. Myself and Johnny Story will be on hand to bring you Christmas parade on Thursday. Jeremy Hames joins us. Kevo Suter joins us as well later on this week for the Spotlight. For now, if you're in the market to buy or sell your home, give us a call today. It's 479-968-5668. I'm Drew Brent. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.